In the autumn of 1260, a Mamluk general named Baybars stood in the hills of northern Palestine, staring down at a valley that would decide the fate of 3 continents. Below him, the most feared army in human history was riding into a trap, but the weapon that would destroy them was not made of steel. For 54 years, the Mongol Empire had been unstoppable. They had conquered from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. They had burned Baghdad to ash, killing 1 million people in a single week. They had made the Tigris River run black with the ink of destroyed books and red with the blood of scholars. Every kingdom that resisted them was erased from the map. Every army that fought them was annihilated. Now they were coming for Egypt, the last major Muslim power standing. And everyone knew what happened to those who defied the Mongols. Surrender meant survival, resistance meant extinction. But Baybars knew something the Mongols did not. He knew that the greatest army ever assembled had a fatal weakness. And that weakness was not courage or training or weapons. It was something so mundane, so seemingly insignificant, that the Mongols never saw it coming until it was too late. Now, before we get to that secret, you need to understand just how impossible this victory seemed. Because without that context, you cannot appreciate the sheer audacity, the absolute insanity of what the Mamluks were about to attempt. 2 years earlier, in February of 1258, the city of Baghdad fell. For 500 years, Baghdad had been the jewel of the Islamic world. It was home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Its libraries held hundreds of thousands of books, representing centuries of accumulated human knowledge. The Abbasid Caliph ruled from this magnificent city, considered the spiritual leader of millions of Muslims from Spain to India. The Mongol general Hulagu Khan arrived with over 100,000 men. The Caliph al-Mustasim believed his walls were impregnable. He believed his prestige would protect him. He believed perhaps that God would intervene. He was wrong on every count. When Baghdad fell, the Mongols spent 1 week systematically destroying everything that made it great. They threw so many books into the Tigris River that witnesses said the water ran black with ink for months. They executed scholars, artists, scientists, anyone who represented learning or culture. They killed so many people that modern historians estimate between 200,000 and 1 million souls perished. The Caliph himself was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, because Mongol superstition forbade spilling royal blood directly on the ground. Think about that for a moment. The center of Islamic civilization, a city that had stood longer than any European capital, was erased in 7 days. And the Mongols moved on as if they had simply checked another box on their list of world conquest. But here is what you need to understand. Baghdad was not special. This was standard procedure for the Mongol war machine. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, they annihilated 80,000 Russian soldiers. Of that entire army, fewer than 1 in 10 survived. In 1241, they invaded Poland and Hungary simultaneously, terrorizing all of Europe. In 1258, they obliterated the Khwarezmian Empire so thoroughly that cities which had stood for 1,000 years simply ceased to exist. By 1260, the Mongol Empire controlled the largest contiguous landmass in human history, larger than Rome at its peak, larger than Alexander's conquests, larger than anything the world had ever seen. And now, after crushing Baghdad and accepting the surrender of Damascus without a fight, they were coming for Egypt. The Mamluk Sultanate was the last major Muslim power left standing. Hulagu Khan had sent envoys to Cairo with a letter that was less an offer and more a promise of annihilation. The letter read, quote, "From the King of Kings of the East and West, the great Khan, you should think of what happened to other countries and submit to us. We have conquered vast areas, massacring all the people. You cannot escape from the terror of our armies. Where can you flee? What road will you use to escape us? Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, our swords like thunderbolts, our hearts as hard as mountains, our soldiers as numerous as sand. Fortresses will not detain us. Your prayers to God will not avail against us. Submit or face total destruction." Sultan Qutuz read this letter aloud to his council in Cairo. Some advisors urged immediate surrender. After all, everyone who had resisted the Mongols had been destroyed. Was not submission the only logical choice? Qutuz's response was to execute the Mongol envoys and mount their heads on the gates of Cairo for all to see. It was a declaration of war in the most brutal terms possible. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. Either Egypt would stand or it would die fighting. But Qutuz knew something his panicked advisors did not. The Mongols, for all their terrifying reputation, were not at full strength. In 1259, the great Khan Mongke had died while campaigning in China. Mongol law required all princes to return to Mongolia to elect a new Khan. Hulagu had departed Syria, taking the bulk of his massive army with him. Some estimates suggest he took over 100,000 men back east, leaving only a rear guard of perhaps 10 to 20,000 under his general Kitbuka. This was still a formidable force. These were Mongol veterans who had conquered from Baghdad to Damascus. But it was a fraction of what Egypt would face if Hulagu returned. Qutuz saw his window. He assembled an army of roughly 20,000 Mamluk cavalry, and then he did something extraordinary. He negotiated safe passage through Crusader territory. The Mamluks and Crusaders had been mortal enemies for decades. But the Crusaders understood that if Egypt fell, they would be next. So in July of 1260, the Mamluk army marched north through enemy territory unmolested. They entered Palestine. And that is where Baybars, the general who knew this land intimately, revealed his plan. He knew where to fight. He knew the one place where Mongol superiority would become Mongol vulnerability. The secret was in their feet, or rather, in the absence of something on their feet. And to understand that secret, we need to talk about horse hooves, grass, and rocky ground. Because the weapon that would crush the Mongols was made of iron. 4 small pieces of iron, nailed to the bottom of a horse's foot. I know what you are thinking. Horseshoes? That is the big secret? Everyone had horses in medieval warfare? What made horseshoes so special? Stay with me, because this seemingly trivial detail is the key to everything. The Mongol war machine was built on a single foundation, their horses. And these were not just any horses. The Mongol pony was a marvel of natural selection, bred over thousands of years on the grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. They stood only about 4.5 feet tall at the shoulder, small and stocky compared to the sleek Arabian steeds or massive European war horses. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in sheer toughness. A Mongol pony could survive on minimal fodder, grazing on whatever sparse grass it could find. It could endure temperature extremes from blazing desert heat to 40 degrees below zero in Siberian winters. And here is a detail that sounds almost too bizarre to be true, but is well documented in medieval sources. When necessary, a Mongol warrior could make a small incision in his horse's neck, drink some of its blood for nourishment, seal the wound, and keep riding. This eliminated the need for a slow-moving supply train. Think about the strategic implications. A European army needed to follow roads because it had heavy supply wagons. They needed to stay near cities for provisions. They moved slowly, predictably. The Mongols could cross deserts, traverse mountains, and appear in places where an army should not be able to exist. Every Mongol cavalryman brought 3 to 5 horses with him on campaign. While a European knight might ride one exhausted horse, the Mongol was constantly switching to fresh mounts. A Mongol army could cover 60 miles in a single day, twice the distance of a typical medieval army. They could appear where they were thought to be impossible, strike with devastating force, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. They were the closest thing the medieval world had to modern air cavalry. Highly mobile, self-sufficient, and capable of striking anywhere at any time. But those same horses that made them invincible on the steppe had a fatal weakness when they left their homeland. The Mongol pony had evolved on soft grassland. For thousands of years, their hooves had been shaped by natural selection to handle that specific environment. Their hooves were hard and durable for soft soil and grass. Mongols did not need horseshoes on the steppe. The soft ground actually helped toughen their hooves naturally. But Syria and Palestine are very different places geologically. The terrain is characterized by rocky hills, limestone outcroppings, and hard-packed soil baked under the Mediterranean sun. When horses without shoes traverse this kind of terrain repeatedly, their hooves crack, chip, and become painfully bruised. A horse with damaged hooves moves more slowly, tires more quickly, and in severe cases becomes completely lame. The Mamluks, who had been fighting in this region for generations, shod their horses with iron. They had learned this technique from Byzantine and European sources. Their horses had iron shoes nailed to their hooves that protected them from the rocky ground. This seemingly minor difference had enormous strategic implications. On the rocky terrain of Syria and Palestine, Mamluk horses could move faster, fight longer, and maneuver more effectively than Mongol ponies. But there was a second problem for the Mongols, and this one was even more fundamental: grass. Remember how I told you that each Mongol warrior brought 3 to 5 horses? Let us do the math. If General Kitbuka had 15,000 Mongol cavalry and each had 4 horses, that is 60,000 horses total. Each horse needs roughly 9 pounds of grass per day to maintain fighting condition. That is 540,000 pounds of fodder needed daily. To put that in perspective, those horses need approximately 10 square miles of good grassland to graze on every single day. Mongolia is covered in grassland. It is literally called the Eurasian steppe. Grass stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. The Mongols could graze their massive horse herds easily, moving from one pasture to another as they advanced. Syria is semi-arid. It has some grassland in certain areas, particularly in the north near the Euphrates River Valley, but nothing like the endless seas of grass that the Mongols were accustomed to. The Syrian landscape could support a limited number of horses before overgrazing became a critical problem. This meant that the Mongols could not bring their normal overwhelming numbers of horses to Syria. They could not use their standard strategy of switching to fresh mounts constantly. Their horses were working harder on tougher terrain with less food. And every mile they traveled over rocky ground, their unshod hooves deteriorated a little more. The Mamluks knew this. Historical records indicate that Mamluk scouts had been monitoring Mongol movements for weeks. They had observed that the Mongol horses were struggling. Some Mamluk commanders had even adopted a scorched earth strategy in certain areas, burning grassland to deny it to the Mongols. It was medieval resource denial warfare, and it was brutally effective. Baybars, the Mamluk general, had spent years as a fugitive in Syria and Palestine after falling out of favor with a previous sultan. He had wandered through the very region where the battle would take place. He knew the terrain intimately. He knew the hills, the valleys, the springs, the narrow passes. He knew where cavalry could maneuver and where they could not. And most importantly, he knew where the ground was rockiest. Now let us talk about the Jezreel Valley itself, because this is where geography becomes a weapon. The Jezreel Valley is a triangular plain in northern Palestine, stretching about 30 miles from Mount Carmel in the west to the Jordan River Valley in the east. It has been the site of countless battles throughout history precisely because it is a natural invasion route. If you are marching from Syria toward Egypt, you are going to pass through this valley. The valley floor is relatively flat and open, perfect cavalry country, the kind of terrain the Mongols loved. But here is what makes it special. While the valley floor is open, it is surrounded on all sides by hills and low mountains. Mount Gilboa rises to the south. The hills of Lower Galilee bound it to the north. Mount Tabor looms to the northeast. And these hills are not bare, windswept highlands. They are covered with trees and rocky outcroppings. The battle would take place near a spring called Ain Jalut, which means Goliath's spring in Arabic. Legend said this was where the biblical David had defeated Goliath thousands of years earlier. The spring sits at one of the narrowest points of the valley, where the hills close in from both sides. Baybars looked at this terrain and saw a possibility. The valley floor would draw the Mongols in. It was perfect ground for their cavalry tactics. But those surrounding hills, with their trees and rocks, could hide an army. And if the Mamluks could lure the Mongols into the valley and then attack from the hills, they could negate the Mongol mobility advantage and force them to fight on ground that favored heavier cavalry. More importantly, they could force the Mongols to fight uphill on the rockiest terrain available. Every charge the Mongols made would be on damaged, painful hooves over loose stones and uneven ground. Meanwhile, the Mamluks with their shod horses could charge downhill, gravity adding force to their impact, their iron shoes gripping the rocks without hesitation. It was a plan that required perfect timing, iron discipline, and more than a little luck. But it was the only plan that gave them a chance. On the night of September the 2nd, 1260, Sultan Qutuz positioned the bulk of his army in the hills surrounding Ain Jalut, hidden among the trees and rocks. Baybars would take a small vanguard force, perhaps 3,000 cavalry, and position them in the valley itself as bait. When the Mongols appeared, Baybars would engage them, provoke them, and then execute a feigned retreat, drawing them deeper into the valley toward the hills where Qutuz waited with the main force. It was the Mongols' own favorite tactic turned against them. The student was about to teach the master a very painful lesson. As dawn broke on September the 3rd, Baybars sat on his horse in the valley, watching the northern horizon. His mouth was dry, his heart hammered in his chest. Behind him, 3,000 Mamluk cavalry waited in tense silence. Around them, hidden in the hills, another 17,000 warriors held their breath, and then from the north they saw it, dust rising in the distance. Beneath that dust, the Mongol army was coming. General Kitbuka leads his Mongol army into the Jezreel Valley that morning with supreme confidence. He has fought for decades alongside Hulagu Khan. He has helped conquer Baghdad. He has seen Damascus surrender without a fight. When his scouts report that a Mamluk force is blocking the valley ahead, Kitbuka probably smiles. Finally, the Egyptians are going to stand and fight. This will be over quickly. The battle begins with Baybars doing exactly what Kitbuka expects. He charges forward with his cavalry to meet the Mongol advance. Arrows fill the air. Men and horses scream. But Baybars is not trying to win this first engagement. He is trying to provoke the Mongols, to sting them, to make them angry. For hours, Baybars' small force skirmishes with the Mongols, darting in and out, never committing to a full engagement. The Mongols find this incredibly frustrating. Kitbuka orders a heavier assault, trying to pin down Baybars' force and destroy it. And then, exactly as planned, Baybars gives the signal. Retreat. His cavalry turns and flees back down the valley. To the Mongols, it looks like victory. The Mamluks are breaking under pressure. Kitbuka orders the pursuit. The Mongol cavalry charges after the retreating Mamluks, eager for the kill. As they race down the narrowing valley, Kutuz watches from the hilltop. This is the critical moment. He waits. The Mongols draw closer to the hidden positions. Closer, closer. Now, the hills erupt with warriors. From three sides, Mamluk cavalry and infantry pour out from among the trees and rocks. War drums thunder. Battle cries echo off the valley walls. The Mongols, stretched out in pursuit formation, suddenly find themselves surrounded. They try to wheel around to form a defensive circle, but they are fighting uphill. The rocky ground that has been slowly destroying their unshod hooves becomes a major liability. Their horses stumble on loose rocks. They slip on uneven terrain. Their damaged hooves make them slower, less maneuverable. Meanwhile, Mamluk horses, protected by their iron shoes, charge down the rocky slopes without hesitation. The Mamluks unleash devastating arrow volleys from multiple directions. Then they fire their hand cannons, crude gunpowder weapons called midfa. The explosive cracks terrify the Mongol horses. Animals rear and bolt. Riders are thrown. Formations break apart. Mamluk heavy cavalry crashes into the chaos. The battle rages for hours. The Mongols fight with incredible ferocity and manage to break through the Mamluk left flank. Sultan Kutuz, seeing the danger, removes his helmet and rides directly into the gap. As he charges, he shouts, "O soldiers of Islam, O defenders of the faith!" Seeing their sultan bareheaded and vulnerable, the Mamluk soldiers rally. The breakthrough stalls, then is pushed back. The Syrian auxiliaries in the Mongol army defect, turning their weapons on their former masters. Kitbuka refuses to flee. He continues fighting until an arrow strikes his horse and the animal collapses. Mamluk soldiers surround him. When brought before Kutuz, the captured general remains defiant. When the news of my death reaches Hulagu, he says, the ocean of his wrath will boil over, and from Azerbaijan to the gates of Egypt will quake with the hooves of Mongol horses. Then they behead him on the battlefield. The Mongol army breaks entirely. Fleeing cavalry on tired horses with damaged hooves try to escape across rocky terrain while pursued by fresh Mamluk cavalry on shod horses. It is a slaughter. By the end of the day, for the first time in over 50 years, a Mongol army has been decisively defeated in open battle. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. Less than 2 months after his great victory, Sultan Kutuz is murdered by his own general during a hunting expedition. Baybars, the man who devised the brilliant ambush, assassinates the Sultan who trusted him and declares himself the new ruler of Egypt. History is messy like that. Kutuz made the brave decision to fight rather than surrender. He won the battle that saved Islamic civilization in the Middle East. His reward was death by betrayal within weeks of his greatest triumph. Meanwhile, Hulagu Khan received news of the disaster and prepared to invade Egypt with his full army. But he never got the chance. Berk Khan, the Mongol ruler of the Golden Horde, who had converted to Islam, declared war on Hulagu for destroying Baghdad. This civil war, Mongol versus Mongol, consumed Hulagu for the rest of his life. He died in 1265 without ever conquering Egypt. Ain Jalut marked the high water mark of Mongol expansion westward. They would never cross that line again. Not because they lacked courage or skill, but because their entire system of warfare was optimized for the Eurasian steppe. When they moved into a different environment, their advantages became liabilities. The secret that crushed the Mongols was not a super weapon or a miracle. It was horseshoes, grass, and rocky hills. It was local knowledge used brilliantly. It was understanding that the ground beneath your feet can be just as important as the sword in your hand. The Mongols conquered the largest land empire in history, but they learned at Ain Jalut that there is always ground where even the greatest army cannot tread. Sometimes terrain is destiny, and on September the 3rd, 1260, the terrain of the Jezreel Valley decided the fate of civilizations.